The Pelori had sent their plea 3 weeks before the Concordat session. Their message was simple. Their skis were full of Vreth warships, their cities were being renamed, and their children were being taken to labor camps. They asked the galaxy for help. They believed the galaxy would listen. It did not. The Solhari delegation voted no. The Dune Collective voted no. 17 smaller member species, afraid of Vreth retaliation, voted no. The session lasted less than an hour. By the time Ambassador Raid Novik of Earth stood up to cast humanity's vote, the result was already decided. He voted yes anyway. He was the only one. Lord Speaker Caro of the Vreth turned to face the human delegation with something between amusement and contempt. "The soft ones cast their little vote," he said, loud enough for the whole chamber to hear. "How brave, how useless." Some delegates laughed, not all of them, but enough. Raid did not look at Caro. He gathered his papers, nodded to his aide, and walked out of the chamber without a word. Outside in the corridor, he stopped at a water terminal, filled a small cup, and drank it slowly. His aide asked him if he was all right. He said yes. Then he pulled out a small communicator and sent a single message back to Earth. It said they voted no. The reply came in under 6 minutes. It said, "Understood. Begin Phase 3. Raid read it twice, then he deleted it. Nobody in the galaxy knew what the far side of Earth's moon looked like from underneath. There was a reason for that. For 30 years, every sensor sweep of the lunar surface by Concordat observation probes had returned the same data: dead rock, old craters, trace minerals of no military value. The probes were not wrong. They were simply looking at the surface. 300 meters below it was a different world entirely. The lunar shelf, as Earth's engineers called it, stretched across 42 kilometers of hollowed-out rock. The caverns had been carved slowly, carefully, over 3 decades, first by unmanned drilling systems, then by crews who signed lifelong confidentiality agreements and were quietly rotated out every 2 years. The work never stopped, not once in 30 years. What they built inside those caverns was not what the galaxy expected from a species with no military record. 47 dreadnoughts sat in dry dock, arranged in rows like sleeping giants. They were not beautiful in the way that Vreth warships were beautiful, all sharp angles and ceremonial plating. Human ships were blunt, dense, and deeply practical. Their hulls were layered with a material that Concordat metallurgy had no name for, because no Concordat scientist had ever developed it. Earth's engineers called it adaptive resonance plating. What it did was simple to describe and nearly impossible to counter. When energy struck it, the plating read the frequency and density of the hit and reconfigured its molecular structure in a fraction of a second to resist it. It did not absorb damage. It refused it. The weapons were different too. Conventional Concordat warships fired focused plasma, mass drivers, or graviton lances. Earth's dreadnoughts carried those as secondary systems. Their primary armament was something Dr. Suli Adara had spent 19 years developing in a lab buried under the Tibetan plateau. She called them cascade cannons. The principle was not complicated, but the engineering was brutal. The cannon fired a burst of entangled particles tuned to the resonant frequency of bonded metal alloys. When the burst reached its target, it caused a rapid, cascading failure of structural coherence throughout the hull, not an explosion, not a breach, but a sudden and total loss of integrity. A ship hit by a full cascade burst did not blow up. It folded. It simply stopped being a ship. Nobody outside of Earth's strategic command knew any of this. That was the point. Chief Engineer Doran Feld walked the dock of the largest vessel that evening, the INS Threshold, flagship of the fleet. He walked alone, the way he always did when a build was nearly finished. He had spent 11 years on this ship specifically, longer than any other. He knew every weld, every conduit, every section of plating. He knew where the metal sang under stress and where it went quiet. He stopped at the base of the forward gun array and put one hand flat against the hull. It was warm. The power core had been installed that morning. One of his junior engineers jogged up behind him. "Final diagnostic came back clean, sir. All systems nominal. She's ready." Feld nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said eventually. "Sorry." "Those Pelori kids." He took his hand off the hull. "In the camps." The engineer had no answer for that. Feld turned and walked back toward the operations center, his footsteps echoing through the dock. Behind him, the threshold sat in the dark of the lunar shelf, fully powered for the first time, 47 years of human patience made solid and armed and ready. In the Concordat chamber, Caro was already preparing remarks for his next session. He had not yet received the intelligence report from Subcommander Dale. When he did, he would read it 3 times before he believed it. But that was still 90 days away. The Vreth had a saying, "Know your enemy's weapons and you know your enemy." It was old wisdom, repeated in every military academy across their empire. Their intelligence divisions were considered the finest in the Concordat. They had never failed to correctly assess a new species. They had never met a species that understood this saying better than they did. Subcommander Dale had been assigned to Earth observation 18 months before the Pelori vote. It was not a prestigious posting. Watching a species with no military record was the kind of work given to officers who had made small errors and needed a quiet place to be forgotten. Dale accepted the assignment without complaint and set up his observation post on a Vreth monitoring station 2 light towers from the Sol system. For the first 4 months, he reported nothing unusual. Human orbital traffic was commercial. Their communication signals were noisy with politics and entertainment. Their space stations ran trade routes and mining operations. Nothing suggested a species preparing for war. Then he noticed the energy readings. They were subtle, buried under the ordinary thermal output of the lunar surface, easy to miss if you were not looking closely. Dale was looking closely because he had nothing else to do, and because something about the readings did not match the geological models in his database. The moon was supposed to be geologically dead. Dead rock did not produce cyclic, regulated energy spikes every 48 hours. He flagged it in his report. He noted that it could be a deep survey operation or an unmanned research installation. He rated the anomaly as low concern. He was wrong, and he knew it even then. He wrote low concern because high concern would require him to explain what a geologically active power source under the lunar surface might actually mean, and the answer to that question unsettled him in a way he could not easily put into words. 40 years earlier, the answer had begun with a speech. Admiral Brem Salazar had retired from Earth's Navy at age 62 after a long career that included 3 peacetime commands and 1 very short war against a pirate consortium near Saturn's orbital lanes. He was not famous. He was not brilliant in the way that history remembers brilliance. He was, by all accounts, simply a man who thought carefully about things and took a very long time to stop being angry. What made him angry was simple. In 2147, a Vreth exploration vessel had passed through the outer Sol system and destroyed Earth's research platform above Callisto. The Vreth called it a navigational error. They sent no apology. The Concordat, which Earth had just joined, noted the incident and moved on. Salazar was not on the platform. He knew 3 people who were. 6 months later, he sat in front of the UN Security Council in a closed session and gave a speech that was never made public, never leaked, and never officially acknowledged. The recording was kept in a sealed archive for 80 years. In it, he said the following: "We cannot fight them today. We cannot fight them next year or in 10 years. We do not have the ships, the weapons, or the knowledge. What we have is time, and we have the sense to use it quietly. We smile. We trade. We sit in their chambers and listen and say very little. We learn how their ships are built and how their weapons work. We learn what they are afraid of. And while we do all of that, we build. Not in anger, not in pride, in certainty. Because one day, and it may be far from now, they will do something that cannot be ignored. And on that day we must be ready. We must be more than ready. We must be inevitable. The Security Council approved Project Warden by a vote of 14-1 that evening. The one dissenting vote was from a delegate who thought it would never work. He was not invited to subsequent sessions. Project Warden worked because it was patient and because it was invisible. Every Concordat vessel that docked at a human station was scanned, not with active sensors which could be detected, but with passive arrays hidden in the docking clamps, the fuel lines, the atmospheric exchange systems. The scans built up detailed pictures of hull compositions, drive cores, weapons arrays, and shield generators over hundreds of visits across decades. Earth scientists did not copy what they found. They studied it, understood it, and then asked a question that no Vreth or Solhari engineer had ever thought to ask. Why does it work this way, and what would work better? The adaptive resonance plating came from that process. Vreth hull armor was strong because it was dense. A human physicist named Orla Finn asked why density was the goal when reconfiguration was possible, and spent 6 years proving that a hull that changed itself was stronger than a hull that simply resisted. She was 41 when she started. She was 47 when she succeeded. The Cascade Cannon came from a Solhari theoretical paper on particle entanglement that the Solhari themselves had filed and forgotten, because the energy requirements seemed impractical. Dr. Suli Adara found it in a trade exchange archive, read it on a long flight back from a Concordat session, and spent the next 19 years making it practical. Nobody outside Earth knew about Orla Finn. Nobody outside Earth knew about Suli Adara. Dale did not know about them either, when he sent his updated report to High Command 90 days before the fleet emerged. He had upgraded his anomaly assessment from low concern to moderate concern. He included a note at the bottom: recommend further investigation before any action that might provoke a human response. High Command did not act on it. They had a war to celebrate. There is a particular kind of silence that fills a room when someone says something true that everyone has been pretending is false. It is not a comfortable silence. It is the silence of people deciding how to react before they commit to a reaction. That silence filled the Concordat chamber on the day Raid Novik spoke for the second time about Pelori. He had been granted 15 minutes. He used 12. He did not raise his voice. He did not use displays or data feeds or the dramatic lighting effects that Vreth speakers favored. He stood at the human delegation's small podium. Earth had never requested a larger one, and he spoke in the plain, direct way that had made him unremarkable to most of the chamber for 4 years. He described what the Vreth had done on Pelori, not in general terms, in specific ones. He named the labor facilities. He named the number of Pelori citizens relocated in the first 60 days. He named the cultural sites that had been destroyed. He had sources, careful, verified, unimpeachable sources, and he cited every one of them. Then he said, the Concordat should understand that Earth does not recognize the annexation of Pelori. We consider it an act of illegal conquest. If no remedy is provided within 90 standard days, Earth will act in accordance with the principles this body was supposedly founded on. Lord Speaker Caro did not bother standing up. He spoke from his seat, relaxed, one arm draped over the back of his chair. And what will you act with, soft ones? Stern letters. Several delegates laughed. The Dune Observer emitted a clicking sound that functioned as the collective's equivalent of amusement. Even one of the Solhari elders allowed himself a small, dry smile. Raid looked at Caro for a moment, just looked at him. Then he gathered his notes and sat down. He did not look angry. He did not look embarrassed. He looked, to the few observers who studied him carefully afterward, like a man who had just finished a task he had been assigned rather than a man who had just lost an argument. One of those observers was Dale, watching the session feed from his monitoring post. He paused it. He replayed Raid's expression 3 times. Then he opened a new intelligence report and typed a single line at the top. The human is not making a threat. He is making a record. He sent the report. It was not read for 11 days. On Earth, the 90-day clock triggered a prearranged sequence that had been sitting dormant in Strategic Command System for 3 years. The sequence had no dramatic name. It was listed in the operational database as Protocol 7 Final, and it consisted of 612 individual orders sent simultaneously to facilities on Earth, on the Moon, on Mars, and at 3 deep space construction stations that the Concordat did not know existed. Director Myra Osei signed off on it from her office, then went to get tea. She was not a dramatic person. She had run Earth's Strategic Command for 9 years, and before that she had spent 20 years in the engineering program that designed the Threshold's drive core. She understood the fleet better than almost anyone alive. She also understood what using it would mean, not the battle, which she was confident about, but the afterward, the part where the galaxy knew. She stood at the window in her office and looked out at the lights of the city below and thought about that for a while. Then she went back to her desk and started working. In the lunar shelf, Protocol 7 Final meant one thing: final readiness checks on all 47 Dreadnoughts, 11 destroyers, and 6 carrier-class vessels. The work was quiet and organized. These were not soldiers who had just been called up. They were crews who had been training for this specific mission for between 2 and 8 years. Every one of them had volunteered. Every one of them had been told clearly what they were volunteering for and had been given multiple opportunities to leave without penalty. None of them had left. The Threshold's crew ran their final checks in shifts over 72 hours. Every system was tested. Every weapon was calibrated. The Cascade cannons were run through dry fire simulations for the 49th time since the crew had boarded. Admiral Petra Voss did not give a speech during the readiness period. She walked the ship instead through the gun decks and the medical bay and the drone control stations, nodding to crew members, stopping occasionally to ask specific technical questions, remembering names. She had a talent for remembering names. She had always thought it was the least a commander could do. On the 89th day, she sat alone in the observation deck at the front of the Threshold and looked out at the rock walls of the shelf. She had been born in the city of Durban. She had spent her childhood looking at the Indian Ocean. She had joined the Navy at 18 and spent the next 30 years in service to a country, then a planet, and then an idea. The idea was simple: that there were things worth protecting and people worth standing in front of. She thought about the Pelori children. On the 90th day, Raid Novik sent a 3-word transmission from the Concordat station to every member species simultaneously. It said, as stated, "We act." Caro read it and laughed. He sent back a response, a single character in the Vreth pictographic language that translated roughly to "go ahead and try." In the lunar shelf, 47 Dreadnoughts lit their drives. The rock above them trembled. Dale was already running. The Pelori system had 2 suns and 7 planets, and on the 3rd planet, in a city that had been called Vorin for 900 years before the Vreth renamed it Processing Zone 4, a 12-year-old girl named Asha was carrying water from a distribution point to a shelter that used to be her school. She did this every day. She did not think about rescue. She had stopped thinking about rescue about a month after the ships came. The galaxy had voted. She had understood what that meant even at her age. She was 2 blocks from the shelter when the sky changed. It did not change slowly. It changed the way a light turns on, one moment dark, the next blazing. 64 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a precise formation above the outer edge of the Pelori system, and the energy of that emergence, even at that distance, scattered light across the upper atmosphere in colors the planet had never seen before. Asha stopped walking. She looked up. Every Vreth soldier on the street looked up too. Nobody said anything for almost 10 seconds. Then the Vreth garrison frequency erupted. The Vreth force in the Pelori system was not small. 9 cruisers, 30 frigates, and a command vessel, the Urath's Fist, flagship of Garrison Commander Hirov, orbited the planet in a standard occupation pattern. By any normal Concordat measure, it was more than enough force to control a single mid-level system and deter any rescue attempt by a neighboring species. By the measure of what was coming toward them, it was nothing. The human fleet held formation as it moved in. No spread, no flanking, just a straight approach, slow and deliberate. Admiral Voss had been specific about that in the briefing. She did not want the Vreth to feel surrounded. She wanted them to understand the situation clearly without panic clouding the math. Hirov hailed them within minutes of their arrival. His translator rendered his words in English because the Concordat system defaulted to the language of the incoming vessel. Unidentified fleet. You are entering a sovereign Vreth administrative zone. Identify yourselves and withdraw immediately. Voss opened a channel. This is Admiral Petra Voss commanding the INS Threshold. You have 20 minutes to begin withdrawal from the Pelori system. After that, we will begin. Begin what? Hirov demanded. Voss closed the channel. On the Vreth command deck, Hirov looked at his tactical officer. The tactical officer looked back. Then the tactical officer turned to his display and pulled up the incoming fleet's hull configuration, drive signatures, and energy output. He had never seen anything like them. "Shall I contact High Command?" he asked. "There's no time," Hirov said. "Target the lead ship, all forward batteries." The first Vreth salvo was impressive. Hirov's 9 cruisers and the nearest 12 frigates fired together, a coordinated strike that would have destroyed most Concordat vessels before they could respond. The energy hit the Threshold's forward hull in a concentrated wave. Nothing happened. Not nothing in the sense of minimal damage. Nothing in the literal sense, the plating reconfigured in 0.3 seconds, the energy dispersed, and the Threshold continued on its heading without deviation. No hull breach, no system flicker, no course correction. On the Vreth command deck, Hirov's weapons officer spoke very quietly. "No damage registered. Repeat, no damage." Hirov ordered a second salvo, heavier. Every available weapon in the garrison opened up. The Threshold's armor handled it the same way. So did the 4 Dreadnoughts flanking it. There was a specific quality to the silence on the Vreth bridge after the second volley. It was different from the silence before a battle. It was the silence of people who had just realized they had made a very serious error in judgment and had not yet decided what to do with that realization. Voss waited until the second salvo was finished. Then she said, "All ships, cascade weapons free, minimum viable targets. I want them running, not dead." She was clear about that in the briefing too. The goal was not destruction. The goal was demonstration. The cascade cannons on 7 Dreadnoughts fired simultaneously. 3 Vreth cruisers stopped being cruisers. There was no explosion, no fire. The hulls did not crack or break or split apart. They simply lost their shape not all at once, but in a rapid sequential wave from the point of impact outward, the metal losing its coherence, the structure forgetting what it was supposed to be. The ships folded. They became something between scrap and sculpture, and then they were just drifting clouds of material in the dark. Hirov watched this. He had been a military commander for 31 years. He had seen ships destroyed in every way the galaxy knew how to destroy them. He had never seen that. "All ships," he said. His voice was very steady. That was training. Under the steadiness, he was something he had not been since he was a junior officer. Afraid. "Break formation. Withdraw." It was the first time in recorded Vreth military history that an active garrison had ordered a withdrawal without taking significant casualties. Hirov did not care about the history. He cared about keeping his remaining crews alive. The human destroyers followed the withdrawing Vreth ships, not to engage them but to guide them, pushing them away from Pelori, toward the system's edge, closing off every avenue back toward the planet without firing another shot. It took 4 hours to clear the system. In the streets of what had been called Processing Zone 4, the Vreth soldiers set down their weapons and did not pick them up again. Some of them looked at the sky. Some of them just sat on the ground. Asha was still standing in the street with her water container when the announcement came over every broadcast frequency in the system. A human voice, speaking slowly and clearly in the Pelori language. This is the INS threshold. The Pelori system is free. Stay where you are. Help is coming. She looked up at the sky for a long time. Then she picked up her water and walked the rest of the way to the shelter. There were people there who needed it. The Concordat observation buoys in the Pelori system recorded everything. They recorded it in high resolution, from 11 different angles, with full spectrum sensor data, energy outputs, hull readings, trajectory logs, weapons signatures. The data was transmitted automatically to Concordat relay stations, and from there to every member species within 6 hours of the battle's end. The Solhari received it first, because their relay network was the fastest. The senior analyst on duty reviewed the initial summary, flagged it as priority, and walked the data chip personally to the Elder Council's chamber at a speed that was, for a Solhari, essentially a run. The Dune Collective received it simultaneously across all of its connected minds, and for approximately 4 seconds the Collective's group signal produced an anomalous pattern that its own internal monitoring systems had no classification for. The closest translation was "We did not see this coming." The Vreth received it last, because their systems required command authentication before distributing intelligence of a certain classification level. High Commander Gath authenticated it himself. Then he sat in his command chair, in his private office, and watched the footage of 3 Vreth cruisers folding like soft material in the dark. He watched it 6 times. The emergency Concordat session was called within 12 hours. It was the fastest convening in the body's history. Every delegation attended in person, which was also unusual. Normally, half the smaller species sent remote representatives. Not this time. Nobody sat in the relaxed postures that usually filled the chamber. The Vreth delegation, which had always arranged itself to project authority, backs straight, chins elevated, hands flat on the table, sat very still and said nothing in the opening period. Karo, who had laughed at Raid Novik 11 days earlier, had not laughed since he saw the footage. The session was supposed to be structured: opening remarks, data review, formal response proposals. It became something less structured almost immediately because the Solhari Elder, a being named Ven who had lived through 4 galactic-scale conflicts and was not given to public displays of anything, raised one long-fingered hand before the chair could open formal proceedings. "I have one statement to make," Ven said, "and then I will listen." The chamber went quiet. What humanity has shown us today is not simply a fleet. A fleet can be built by many species. What is significant is what the fleet represents: 30 years of silence, 30 years of deliberate concealment, 30 years of watching and learning and preparing without a single premature action. Then paused. In 3,000 years of recorded Concordat history, no species has done this. Not once, not even us. Another pause. That is what we should be discussing, not the ships, the patients. Nobody responded for almost 8 seconds. Then everyone responded at once. Dale did not attend the Concordat session. He was on a fast transport back to Vreth High Command, where he had been summoned by Gath directly. He had not slept in 30 hours. He had spent most of those hours reviewing his own reports, reading his own words, and thinking about what he had missed and why. He had missed the power readings. He had upgraded them to moderate concern and let someone else decide. That was the first mistake. But the deeper mistake was the one he had made before he ever filed a single report. He had gone to Earth looking for weapons. He had looked at their orbital stations and seen no weapons platforms. He had looked at their fleet registry and seen commercial transports. He had looked at their public communications and seen politics and entertainment. He had seen a species that looked soft and concluded it was soft. It had not occurred to him to ask a different question. What would a species look like if it was pretending to be soft? He was still thinking about that when his transport docked at the High Command Station. He was escorted directly to Gath's private chamber, no waiting, no administrative processing. That told him something. Gath was not angry. If he were angry, Dale would have been left in a waiting room. Gath was sitting behind his desk when Dale entered. The room was dim, the way Gath preferred when he was thinking carefully. On the desk was a single screen showing a still image, the threshold, caught by an observation buoy at the moment it fired its cascade weapons. The barrel arrays lit with a light that had no Vreth equivalent. "Sit," Gath said. Dale sat. "You flagged an anomaly," Gath said. "Twice. You rated it moderate concern." "Yes." "Why not high concern?" Dale was quiet for a moment. "Because the evidence was indirect. Because a high concern rating would have required me to explain what I suspected, and what I suspected seemed too large to be true." Gath looked at the screen. It was too large to be true, and it was true anyway. He turned back to Dale. "I am not punishing you. Your error was not unique. Every intelligence officer in this building made the same mistake. I made it too. I want to know why." Dale had been thinking about exactly this for 30 hours. "We looked for weapons, Commander. We checked their docking stations, their orbital platforms, their registered vessels. We looked for the things we would build if we were preparing for war. And they built somewhere we weren't looking. Underground. Literally underground. Not because they couldn't put the ships in orbit, they clearly had the capability, but because they understood that visible preparation is a provocation and they did not want to provoke. They wanted to wait until the waiting was finished." Gath said nothing. "We looked for weapons," Dale said. "We should have looked for patience. Patience is the most dangerous weapon a species can have, because you cannot see it until it is too late to respond to it." The silence in the room lasted a long time. Then Gath said, "Find out what else we missed." Back in the Concordat chamber, Raid Novik had still not spoken. He let the chaos run for 2 full hours before the chair called on the human delegation. Then he walked to the podium and set down one sheet of paper. "This is Earth's fleet registry," he said. "We are submitting it to the Concordat for the first time today." He read out the numbers, 64 vessels, full technical specifications. Then he said, "The last line reads, there are more." He picked up his paper and sat down. He did not say what more meant. He did not say how many more, or where they were, or what they carried. He did not need to. Asha was 11 years old when the Vreth came, and 12 when they left, and the year between those two events had changed the shape of everything she understood about the world. She stood in the doorway of what used to be her school and watched a human soldier carry supply crates down the street. The soldier was tall and dark-haired and moved with the kind of quiet efficiency that Asha had come to associate with the people from the ships. They did not shout orders. They did not move in aggressive formations. They just worked. They had been working for 3 weeks, setting up water systems and food distribution and a medical station in the old civic hall. The soldier noticed her watching and gave her a small nod before disappearing around the corner. Asha thought about that nod for a long time afterward. It was not the nod of someone who had saved her. It was the nod of someone who was doing a job and saw her as a person while they were doing it. She was not sure why that felt like the more important thing, but it did. Admiral Petra Voss had been on the surface of Pelori for 6 days, when the delegation from the Pelori Leadership Council came to see her. They met in a large room in the Civic Hall, mostly empty, still smelling of the disinfectant the medical team had used to clean it. The council members were older people, the kind who had been in positions of authority before the Vreth arrived, and had survived the occupation either by being careful or by being lucky or both. They were polite and composed and clearly exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. The eldest of them, a woman named Torin, asked the question that all of them were thinking. "Why did you wait so long?" Voss had been asked easier questions in her life. She took a moment before she answered. She did not want to give them a speech. She did not think they deserved a speech. "We had to be certain," she said. "Certain we could win quickly. Certain we could protect you during the fight, not just after it. If we had come before we were ready and we had lost, or if the battle had lasted weeks instead of hours, the harm to your people would have been worse." Torin listened to this carefully. "And were you certain when you came?" "Yes." "And before that, were you ever close to certain?" The room was quiet. "No," Voss said, "not before the last few years." Torin nodded slowly. "Do you know how many of us died while you were becoming certain?" The question was not angry, it was just direct. Voss had learned that about the Pelori in 6 days. They said what they meant. They had probably always been that way. The occupation had not changed that. "Not the exact number," Voss said. "We know the camps, we know the labor quotas, we're still counting." "So are we," Torin said. "So are we." They sat in silence for a moment. Not an unfriendly silence, an honest one. "We are grateful you came," Torin said at last. "We want you to know that clearly without condition. We are grateful, and we will also carry the count." "You should," Voss said, "and so should we." The Concordat Security Council granted Earth a permanent seat 17 days after the battle. Raid Novik accepted it in a brief session with no ceremony. He had one condition, stated in advance in writing and not open to negotiation. The Concordat would establish a binding intervention mechanism, a rule that required member species to act when another member species was under illegal military occupation, with a threshold that could not be blocked by the aggressor's allies. The Vreth delegation objected, formally and at length. The objection failed by a margin that had not been seen in a Concordat vote in 40 years. Even 3 of the smaller species that had previously voted with the Vreth in every session switched their positions. Raid signed the instrument of membership at a plain table in a side room. His aide took a photograph. It was the only record of the moment. He had specifically asked for no press, no ceremony, no flags. "You could have made this into something larger," his aide said afterward, looking at the photograph. "It is already large enough," Raid said. Dorenfeld's message reached Voss on the 7th day of her surface posting. It was not encrypted, not classified. It was a voice message, 15 seconds long, sent from the lunar shelf, where he had been for 2 days already. He had gone straight back after the fleet launched. He was not a battle man, he said. He had built the thing that did the battle, and now he was back to building the next thing. "Just wanted to know how she held up," his voice said, meaning the threshold. "Structural reports look good from here, but I want to hear it from someone who was on her." Voss replied the same evening. Her message was also short. "She held up fine, not a weld out of place." A pause. "The note is still in the chair." Feld's response came the next morning, a single laughing sound and then nothing. The note, for those who did not know, was a small piece of paper that one of the dock workers had taped to the inside of the captain's chair during the final build phase. Nobody knew who had put it there. It said, in handwriting that was not particularly neat, "Don't miss." Voss had left it there on purpose. She figured they hadn't. On the last evening of her surface posting, Voss walked to the edge of the city, past the last distribution point, past the last human patrol, into a stretch of open ground where the city gave way to the plain. The grass was a dark reddish color, short and dry, moving in a slow wind. She stood there alone and looked up at the sky. The threshold was up there, somewhere, in high orbit. 46 other dreadnoughts were out there in the system, in the slow patrol patterns she had assigned before coming down. They would stay until the Pelori Security Council said they were no longer needed, and not one day longer. That had been her order. Not Earth's order, not Concordat protocol, her order. She was clear about the distinction. Humanity had spent 40 years building the capacity to make a choice like this. The choice, she had decided, was always going to be the harder part. The galaxy had spent 40 years deciding what humanity was. Humanity had spent 40 years deciding what it would become. Both of them, in the end, got their answer.